Tent cities continue to grow along Chicago's lakefront, sparking concerns, there's that word, for residents. Do you think some of these folks were kicked out of their housing because Chicago put all of their money, all of their resources into the illegals? We're going to find out. Here we go. Let's watch a quick video from Fox 32 in Chicago. Good station. Here we go.
We've gotten calls from constituents, from neighbors, from anyone who walks on the lakefront that they've seen an increase in the tents.
48th Ward Alderwoman Lenny Minna-Hoppenworth says it's become especially problematic in the parks bordering the drive between Montrose and Bryn Mawr. Some stretch.
All right. Just a quick observation here. A super quick observation. There isn't garbage everywhere around this tent. And the other one wasn't bad either. In a typical encampment, especially here in Seattle, you have garbage everywhere because these people are whacked out of their gourds on drugs and they don't give a rat's ass where they dump it. This tent here is fairly well kept. And even if it's brand new, the garbage piles up where a fentanyl addict is. If I were to guess, I would say this is just somebody that's kind of down on their luck and they had probably low-income housing before. That's a nice newer tent. It's good size. It's an Ozark Trail tent. It's multi-chambered. And they've got other stuff and she is looking at doing some kind of wringing out of something and she's smelling it to make sure it doesn't stink. Fentanyl addict wouldn't do that. So we'll just keep going though, right?
Taken over by tent encampments. And people who live near the parks are calling.
Concerns about fires. You know, we've had trees on fire. We've had reports about violence in the tent communities. And we've had just concerns, rumors about children being in some tents.
At this tent city off Wilson Avenue, we found people cooking meals with cars.
Again, this one is not littered with refuse everywhere. He's got some cans here, it looks like, but fairly organized, I would say. And things are kind of centered around a tent, and that's, the entrance of his tent is over here. He's got a tarp to keep things kind of dry. He is sitting on something, and he made himself some food. He isn't eating something out of a wrapper like most drug addicts. So, and he's got a cooking utensil here, and he's got a small fire. Call me weird, but this doesn't look like a whacked out drug addict. It just doesn't. So let's keep going.
Cars roaring by just a few feet away. No one seems to know for sure why so many people are moving here, but it exploded over the summer.
I've been here at Tent City for 4 months.
You've been here for 4 months?
Absolutely.
This woman living in a small tent with a propane heater says she was living in an apartment with housing vouchers from the city, but the money dried up. She believes the money was diverted to sheltering migrants.
There you go. That's what I think is happening as well. Got a spike. All of a sudden, Chicago's housing, they're trying to get everybody into housing, but you can't do both the migrants and the illegals and their own. So who gets the boot? Chicago's own. And that's what you're hearing constituents talk about on the regular in council meetings. They're saying, hey, elected officials, you're overlooking us and you spent $574 million on the illegals. What's up with that? And now you're asking us for $300 million tax increase? F to the no on that one. And so city council in Chicago literally said 50-0. Yeah, we're not doing that one.
Bus to Chicago.
If they got funding for the Venezuelans that come in from Mexico or whatever, and they house them like that, but what about the people that's been out here? I think that's a bunch of bull.
The alderwoman says she's asked the city to conduct what's called an accelerated moving event to find shelters and services for the growing homeless population in the parks. But the city says there's no money left in this year's budget.
This is not what we want to see. We want to see people in actual homes. Tent communities are not a shelter, and shelters aren't actually a home either. So we want something better for everybody.
The alderwoman says because of drug problems among
It's too weird. How many tents have we looked at? This is very clean. There isn't refuse everywhere. This was in Portland. This would be an absolute disaster zone. You would have even just one tent here. You'd have garbage all over because they don't give a rip when they're on drugs. It's just how it goes, right? It's just, they'd have bikes and they'd have tires and they'd have all kinds of parts and crap, even after a short while, because they just take whatever home they bring home after a meth run and they just drop it and they just never touch it again because, their mind's on to getting that next fix. So I believe what we're seeing here is literally folks that used to have housing that don't. And they're not as irresponsible as the meth heads or the fentanyl heads. They're just not.
Many of the people staying here, she wants the city to put up sharps containers for needles so that people and pets playing here in the public parks don't get hurt. In Edgewater, Dane Placco, Fox 32 Chicago.
We just put up some new content on our private channel. One of the pieces that I found super interesting, it was a behind the scenes look. Como News, Jeremy Harris talks about Seattle mass stabbing. He did a behind the scenes shoot with his videographer, Jonathan, and they happen to be on scene for the second with the 5 stabbings in Seattle's International District. He walks through that, and there's some gory stuff in there. Even though Jeremy blurts it out, he blurs it out. There's some gnarly stuff. And so we can't show that on the regular channel. If you want to check that out, you can get a 14-day free trial. Otherwise, it's going to cost you $3.99 a month. And on an annual basis, $39.99. It's a bargain. It's cheap. Because who doesn't want to see just absolute insanity going on in Seattle? Like 10 people getting stabbed. Thanks for considering. Back to your regularly scheduled program. So clearly, there is drug use going on if they need needles like that. So, it's a thing. I think in any homeless community, you've got drugs because it's a way for people to escape their reality, but it just didn't look all that crazy prevalent to me. And whenever you hear of a spike, meaning something happened, and, the thing I described is, let's go Brandon Johnson with his pointy hair. He was asking for a $300 million tax increase, and literally city council said, no, 50 to zip. Zip. Not one council member, not one alderman said, you know what, Brandon, I think that's a genius idea. Let's go, Brandon. No, they all said, boop, no. Disable Lakeshore Drive is often praised as one of the most beautiful roadways in the world. We heard that. And I have been close to there. I have not been on that road. I don't think I had a car that trip to Chicago. But in recent months, it's also become a scene of hardship. We've gotten calls from constituents, neighbors, anyone who walks on the lakefront that they've seen an increase in the tents. So concerns about fires, that's how they heat themselves, and that's also how they cook. So no matter who's in the tents, that's gonna be an issue. And so much of the resources, so much of the money spent on the homeless comes in the form of how many trips out did fire have to do, to that homeless encampment. And they keep a log of all that, right? We had reports about violence in the tent communities. Yeah, they're lawless communities. They're living off the grid, but in the urban setting, right? They're urban camping. And we've had just concerns, rumors about children being in tents. Yeah, and what they're talking about is, they're talking about some sex trafficking. I'm sure you have. I mean, this goes on every single day. But, during the pandemic, we didn't clear out any of the tents and we just kind of let them proliferate. And as a result, anybody who was in a tent community, hey, bring in the couch, bring in the keg. It's party time, because the CDC wasn't clearing anybody out because they were afraid that if you cleared people out, it's just going to spread the Rona. What they didn't realize is that they were already outside and the numbers of Rona in the homeless communities were very few and far between. Because otherwise, with as compromised as people on drugs are, they'd be falling off like flies, right? Just dying left and right. And that wasn't the case. And we all went, that's really weird. What's going on there? At a tent city near Wilson Avenue, there were people cooking meals just a few feet from the roaring of passing cars. That's how it goes. Oftentimes, these tent communities are on highly traveled arterials. And in Portland, last few years, the number of homeless folks has just absolutely skyrocketed as far as their deaths go because they're getting run over because they're in busy areas. And then cars careen off track and boop, 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 plunk, 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 right over the top of a homeless person and kills him. We had a massive storm called a bomb cyclone storm come through. Bellevue, particularly, my area got super hard hit. And we had one woman just probably a couple of miles this direction from my office. She was taking a shower at night, as you do, long day of work, whatever. Taking a shower, tree came through her house, killed her instantly. Just brutal. We had a number of people get killed. It was a freak, weird storm. I had a big tree come down on my truck. My truck's a Ford, so the tree literally broke on the bed of my truck. Not kidding. And it just knocked a little rust off. It's a 92 Ford F-350 crew cab. Built Ford tough. Yeah. So I've been here at Tent City for 4 months, said the woman. That's the woman we heard interviewed. If they got funding for the Venezuelans that come in from Mexico or wherever, they house them like that. What about the people that's been out here? And that's what she's asking. And that is the big deal going on right now. And it was funny, the interview, and I showed it on a couple of podcasts. There was a number of people that clearly were Trump supporters in Chicago. Remember Juicy Smollett? He just had his verdict overturned on just a small complication. It was just nonsense. But they overturned his verdict of creating the hate crime hoax. It's MAGA country. He was saying that there's two guys walking around with MAGA hats yelling out, "It's MAGA country," in downtown Chicago. Not exactly the bastion of voting red. But at the city council meeting, the first three people I saw are wearing all red. And they were basically saying, hey, you guys are diverting all these resources to the illegals. You're not giving us the money, and we need the money. So what's up with that? And they were saying basically just go Trump. Because I think there's a large percentage of the folks that are like, why are we spending all this money on Ukraine, sending it to Israel, giving it to the illegals? And we, the people here in need, like in Dalton, 20% of the population lives below the poverty line. This is where the dictator of Dalton comes from, Tiffany, Henyard, the super mayor. 90% of that 20% is black. And yet Chicago is sending $574 million to the illegals. Make that make sense, right? Make that make sense. How does that work? Well, the folks you've already got in your community that are well-deserving, that need resources, they're already there. You can't virtue signal on them. There's no juice to that. You don't get anything from that. So screw those people. Hey, we've got these shiny new Venezuelans coming into town. Let's virtue signal there. We're the greatest sanctuary city ever. And the residents are going, huh. And you know what America did? Yeah, check out the results of the 2024 election. Doesn't matter what race. Yeah. So many of them shifted red. The people have spoken. In the meantime, City of Chicago, along with various volunteer groups, is conducting regular well-being checks. Now they do that on a regular basis. So the amount of people living in tents is growing. Okay. Yeah. I mean, what do you say there? Why is it growing? Well, because there's only a finite amount of housing. And one of the other big arguments I've been hearing is that, hey, housing is being pushed up because your entry-level housing is getting sucked up by the illegals on the taxpayer's dollar. So all of that housing gone. So there's massive pressure on what little available housing there is. So people are forced to get something they can't afford because they don't have any of the entry-level stuff. And everybody's being pushed up into more and more expensive housing. And when you've got a finite supply and you don't have much in the way of multifamily construction going on right now, because interest rates have gone significantly up from where they were, there's not a lot of new homes coming on the market. There's not a lot of new units coming on the market. So when the illegals take out that segment of housing, guess what? It's like anybody else that takes it out. Where's it going to go? You still got the same demand, if not more, and you have less supply. It's like gasoline in California. Where's that going to go? Where's that price going to go? Is it up? I'll give you a hint. No. So this lady goes on to say they're getting pushed out and they have nowhere to go. They obviously have nowhere to go. They just had to find some place to put their tents and sleep and be safe at night. That's a tough go. That's a tough go. I don't want to see anybody living outside. But then the argument they would make is that the shelters aren't safe either. Sometimes there are no good answers, right? Life is tough. Get a helmet. That's what Candace Owens always says. And it's a massive oversimplification, but, some of these people aren't drug addicts, and they've literally been pushed out by the agenda in Chicago. And that is something that needs to be addressed, because you can't just shuffle all the money to one group and say, screw you guys. You guys have been lifelong residents of Chicago, but clearly we don't care. So, you've got an element of that going on, I think, right now. Right now, there are no scheduled accelerated moving events in the 48th Ward. We would like at least 1 or 2 to happen next year, and we're going into budget season. So all these priorities, they need to be talked about. And when we're talking about priorities, we're talking about people that can no longer afford their own home because prices have gone up, because resources have been spent on things that were obviously and clearly massive virtue signaling.